With all this, Kun Thepchai and Kun Nat, perhaps it's time to ask what's the implication on American society when we see twin crises of COVID-19 and then George Floyd protest. And yesterday, Kun Thepchai and me talked to Dr. Kantathi Suphamongkhon, former foreign minister, and right now he's director of RAND Corporation. So he has insight on American society and especially on the position of President Trump.
So, Dr. Kantathi, judging from the look of your haircut, I have a feeling that you have not been to a barber for quite a while. Are you still under lockdown or what?
Yes, I think your observation is correct. All the hair salons in California shut down on the 13th, or actually the 14th of March. And they're just going to open up in a few days, maybe.
But what about other aspects of your daily life? Have they been affected in any way?
Yes, quite fundamentally. All the universities have been on online education only, from elementary schools, kindergarten, actually up to high schools, all online. We don't know when the schools will be open yet. Target now is August or September, but it depends on the health situation.
Yeah. It's quite obvious that the continuing lockdown did not stop people from going out on the street last Sunday to protest against racism in Los Angeles, which was probably the biggest demonstrations against racism by far in this big city, right? So what was it like?
It was quite scary at first because we heard rumors demonstrators may actually be going to residential areas. And so a lot of people were scared because they actually were threatening certain neighborhoods, including ours. I live close to UCLA in a neighborhood called Bel Air, and we had quite a few threats coming online. And so we were prepared, but nothing happened. Okay. And down the street from me, the Secretary of, actually the Secretary of Treasury, Mnuchin, has his home here too. So we have Secret Service and we have the local police protection. But luckily, nothing happened like that. So the lootings only took place in the stores. And so we had many days, though, of very, very tense and quite scary days. We had to make sure that all the doors are locked. And for the last nearly 3 months, we were not able to actually go to work at all. Everything had been online. Everything had been more or less shut until the demonstrations. Yeah. And this is quite scary because now the doctors are trying to see what would happen in 2 to 3 weeks because the incubation period is from 5 days on until about 2 weeks.
And it's been about 2 weeks already since the death of George Floyd. So far, how do you see how President Trump handled the situation?
Well, he came out very disappointingly as far as many people in California and elsewhere in America are concerned. For example, he instead of uniting the country, he decided to go his usual path, and that was to divide. And so he was taking sides. He wanted to take the military out onto the streets. He talked about the fact that the police and the military should be strong on the streets and to actually contain or stop the demonstrations. So the word that he used was to dominate the streets. And he tried to use this old law, which actually came about in 1807, would enable the president to use active duty military soldiers, more or less, on the streets of America without the permission of the governors if there was an insurrection. He tried to do that because overall, the general law in the US is that the military, active duty military cannot be used for law and order in the US unless the governors would request. And this act that he tried to use was an exception to that in case of insurrection.
I see.
And I heard that Vice President Pence was in favor of that. He tried to do that in Washington, D.C. And the Attorney General was against, and the Secretary of Defense was against, and the senior military officers were against. So that was kind of dropped. But what he used in Washington was actually the National Guard as well as the federal police. He had federal police from many different agencies surrounding the White House. You heard of the Lafayette Park.
Yep.
The U.S. is a very unique country because it has many different jurisdictions. In Washington, the White House, of course, is under federal land, and the jurisdiction continues to Lafayette Park, where he actually used the federal agencies to clear the road so that he could go to the church and hold the Bible, which became a very famous picture. But it was a negative way of handling things, and he actually received many criticisms, including from previous cabinet members. General Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense, who came out strongly against what Trump has done, and Colin Powell, the previous Secretary of State, also a Republican, came out strongly against him. So the reaction has been divisive, and he had been actually promoting the views of the right-wing, more or less white supremacists all along. So it's been quite negative as far as his handling of the situation is concerned.
Dr. Kantathi, I'm certain that as a keen observer of American politics, and of course the Rand Corporation, the organization you work for, must be making assessment on the chance of President Trump in this upcoming election in November. So what is your assessment now? I mean, judging from the way you handled the situation, the coronavirus, and then the anti-racism demonstrations.
Well, the coronavirus was a major failure on the part of Trump. He ignored the warnings from his own agencies, the National Security Council, the CDC, as well as experts that tried to warn him, including his own cabinet tried to warn him. He ignored that for quite a long time, and eventually, when things got very bad, he started to take action. But on his mind, it was more politics and how he would win elections. And Trump only thinks of winning elections. And his interpretation of winning elections is to have the country completely open so that business can continue and the economic numbers would go up. And he has shown his willingness to sacrifice lives of people in the U.S. For election successes. So he tried to present a picture of elections, economic success versus health. I think the general feeling is that without solving the health problem, the economic problem will be hard to solve in the long run.
But do you think this tactic will work in his favor eventually?
So far, the combination has been quite bad for him. The latest polls have suggested that he is well behind Joe Biden now. And it just came out today, and the numbers just are not very good for Trump at all. Nevertheless, there are still people who are his base, and they will support him no matter what, it seems. Some people still look at the economy. So if somehow the economy will continue to be open and continue to improve, then he might have a better chance, but at this point, it's low. So Joe Biden, in spite of the fact that he has been, of course, in his basement for a few months, he had now decided to leave the basement and came out, and his popularity has gone up.
Yes.
And so, but some people think that maybe he hasn't been speaking enough because, you've probably been following how President Trump likes to speak, and he cannot shy away from cameras. And what happened was, during the coronavirus briefings, he came up with very amazing suggestions using Lysol, people, and many other things. And so he has made so many mistakes, and maybe Joe Biden can summarize all of those situations. So to sum up on COVID-19 regarding Trump, as we know, COVID-19 came from China. So it wasn't Trump's fault that COVID-19 came into existence, but the way the U.S. handled the situation was clearly very, very poorly. The cases are going up to 2 million very soon, and that's the without much testing. So the real number is much higher. And now with the demonstrations, there are calls to reform the police and to relook at all aspects of law enforcement, which Trump is resisting. And so we'll see. It's going to be a very interesting few months.
So that means the situation of protest over George Floyd's death, do you see that it will worsen or make the situation for President Trump worse than before?
I think the situation for President Trump is not as good, especially after the two major crises, the COVID-19. What COVID-19 showed was a high degree of incompetence in the handling of the situation. And with the demonstrations, he came out as a divider. So he's not going to get much support from general public. And it seems that even his Republican party members, some of them are backing away. One, of course, Colin Powell, came out very strongly against President Trump. And some other Republicans have stood out. So the crack is beginning to show, but there are still some who will be holding on. So we'll see this erosion. I think Trump is very, very nervous at this time. He has made an interesting situation, which is a very sad. This is unique for the U.S. Because he likes to be shown on TV. He's very proud of his face. So he does not want to have a mask on. So he refused to have a mask on whenever there's a camera. And lately, he has decided to link wearing a mask with the extreme left. And so he has politicized even wearing the mask. And you will see that people close to him will not have masks on. And now some Republicans are saying, okay, if you wear a mask, you're a Democrat and you're far left. So he has politicized even the mask wearing, which is actually for health purposes.
Dr. Kantathi, as we know, President Trump has been pointing his finger at China, trying to hold the country responsible and accountable for the pandemic. And of course, critics believe that this is nothing more than an attempt to divert the blame from himself, right? But do you think this tactic resonates well with the larger sectors of the American public? blaming China for everything.
Definitely, yes, what you said is absolutely right, Thepchai. Trump realized that the amount of deaths that the U.S. has been faced with, it's under his watch, under his care, and he wanted to push the blame out. He wanted to not talk about the numbers anymore, and he wants to find someone else to blame. And so China comes to mind, and he's been blaming China very, very strongly now. But in addition to China, he is also blaming the WHO, the World Health Organization. In fact, stopped U.S. funding towards the WHO in the middle of a pandemic. So, yes, trying to blame everyone else. He tried to even blame Obama for not having the infrastructure prepared. But actually, Obama did a lot and gave him briefing books, especially on pandemic prevention and the risks of pandemic.
Yes.
And he didn't even look at it.
No, but
So-
did Trump score any points with that kind of tactic, blaming China for the pandemic?
I think to a degree, yes, especially to maybe his supporters and maybe some of the Republican Party members to try to divert attention. And so the bad person is China. And so he probably has gained something, but now, you know, the U.S. Has an impression now that China has taken advantage over the U.S. on many, many fronts, especially in trade, the unfair trade practices in the past. And so even the Democrats don't want to come out to defend the Chinese. So China will be an interesting issue for us to watch, how that proceeds, because we have a situation in Hong Kong too, in which the Chinese have aggravated the situation with the draft national security law, and all that. I think it's going to be troublesome between the U.S. and the Chinese, regardless of who comes in. But it seems that with if it's Joe Biden, then things can probably be worked out in a better way. And the other aspect of Trump is the alienation that he has made with the Europeans, and the relationship between the U.S. and the European allies is rock bottom. So you have a decline of U.S. Alliance, actually the NATO alliance, decline of the strong bond between the U.S. and the Europeans. We have a fundamental decline of U.S. influence in the world. The other problem with COVID-19 is that the U.S. has, for the first time, not been playing any leadership role in the world at all. And it's actually doing the worst in the world. You know, so you have that situation too.
Can you just wrap up with the twin crisis of COVID-19 and racism protest? How do you see this affect position of America in the world stage, in the international community?
The immediate picture is negative on both. With COVID, it's incompetence to the highest degree. The CDC used to be the health agency that the world looked toward for guidance and for help. No longer. The CDC has been has lost a lot of credibility during this crisis. And with the police role in the killing of George Floyd, as well as the police reaction against demonstrations, that had led to demonstrations around the world in support of U.S. American demonstrating on the streets. So the U.S. government is not coming out very good. on that front too. However, there is now a feeling of cohesiveness between the world and the protesters, American protesters. So there is a new bond forming, looking for human rights protection and the right to make changes when things need to be changed.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for your view, Dr. Kantathi Suphamongkhon.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Nice talking to you
Nice
too.
talking to you.
Thank you.
That's the view from former Foreign Minister Dr. Kantathi Suphamongkhon. That's show really tough and challenging time for the U.S. society right now.
And in his view, which is a view being shared widely by critics of President Trump, Trump's priority now is to win the election in November this year. So whatever he says, whatever he does these days is being geared toward that only.
Yeah, politics is in his mind.
Yeah.